I'm proud to be here today, absolutely thrilled to be here today at the first ever International Football Betting Conference in beautiful San Jose, Costa Rica. And as everybody before me has acknowledged, we have to give our due diligence to the crew here at SBR for the terrific job that they've done in putting this together. Let's give them a big hand. I'm going to share with you a lot of stats and things. When they asked me to speak here, it was largely because of my age, if you will. I've been in this industry now for a long time. And in fact, if you go back, talking industry-wise, when I first started in this business, the Pittsburgh Steelers won their first Super Bowl. It's been that long. 1975, the Vietnam War was still going on. Saturday Night Live made its debut in 1975. I'm really aging myself and whatnot, but that's how long it's been. It's over 40 years that I've been in this industry. And I started as a handicapper working out of the basement of my home. And in the basement of my home, I took out an ad from Football News. I decided, you know something? As a kid in high school, my number one passion was math, sports, and history. So this field is exactly what I was destined to do. And I read the Gold Sheet in high school. That was my favorite read, if you will, the Gold Sheet. In fact, ninth grade, I was the class president, and I had to speak before the class before the beginning of the season. And I remember being up there speaking in front of the class, and I had the Gold Sheet sticking in my back pocket, and it fell off the stage, and everybody was wondering what am I covering up there. But that's when I began in this business. It was my passion. It was my love. To say the least, my whole love of my life is here with me right now. And it was 8 years before that, 1975, I was an 18-year-old kid in high school, and I'd met my wife, who is now my wife. She was also same age as me. She's a coal miner's daughter. And if you know about Coal Miner's Daughters of the movie, you know how the fathers are. The fathers are very, very protective of the daughter. And she decided, we don't need to be living this way. So we eloped. We just said, hey, we're going to elope. We hopped on a Greyhound bus. We went to Asheville, North Carolina, and got married. It'll be our 50th wedding anniversary in 2 weeks. Colleen, stand up, please. Stand up. She's shy. She's still shy. There she is. So we go to Asheville, North Carolina, have a great time, obviously, the honeymoon. Come back. The coal miner, the father, has got me dead in his sights. I mean, he wanted to drive the pick right through my chest for stealing his daughter. And he says to me, he says, son, he says, I'm going to tell you one thing. You better have not knocked her up. Well, we knew that when we went to Asheville, North Carolina, we didn't have to worry about that, okay? But when we came back, she was pregnant. So our good fortune was the fact that 9 months and 1 day later, our son was born. That's Mark Jr., and Mark Jr. today works with us in our business. Our business is Playbook. We run our operation out of South Florida, and safe to say that our business is going to be in good hands when we finally do decide to retire. We're basically, aside from Colleen being the love of my life, obviously, we're workaholics. We work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's because it's our passion. It's exactly what we love to do. And looking back, talking about 1975, back then, I'm going to move forward 10 years from that into 1985. That's when I decided, okay, let's reach out to the world and publish a publication, a weekly newsletter. It was called The Playbook, and I worked with Dave Malinsky. Dave's a really well-known authority, handicapping authority in Las Vegas. Dave and I together worked to launch The Playbook as it is today. And the passion that I had for Playbook was driven from the Gold Sheet, going back to high school again, to those high school days of the Gold Sheet. And the person that I looked up to the most was Mort Olson. I don't know if I'm going back too far for people in here, but Mort Olson was the founder and the publisher of the Gold Sheet. And what I really idolized about Mort Olson is he was a man of integrity. He was brilliantly intelligent and honest as the day was long. And those are the qualities that I liked about him. And they're the qualities that I today take in my life. I live my life by the golden rule. I treat people the way that I want to be treated. And I also like having to wake up in the morning each day and liking the person that I'm seeing in the mirror each day. Kind of a tough thing to do in this handicapping industry that we're in, because the industry, as we know, is not regulated. And given the fact that it's not regulated, there's a lot of snake oil salesmen in this industry, to be honest with you. And they create and have given the industry a black eye to the largest degree. So it was my desire to make sure that I wore a white hat and could make this industry become respected. And that's what the purpose of launching Playbook was. When we launched Playbook, the number one purpose was to help inform people to become better handicappers, to become better educated about sports gambling and what sports gambling actually is. There's so many people now that I run across, and everybody, how do you become a handicapper? How can you get in this business? What can you do? Well, it's a business is what it is. It's exactly what it is. It's not something you're going to do part-time. It's what you're going to have a business plan to do, and that's what we do. We basically make sure that we have a business plan with what it is we're doing. At Playbook, when I'm talking about being well-informed, going back a little bit again, back to when I first started in this business, a good friend of mine was a fellow named Richard Clamian. He was a sportsbook director at the Stardust. And Richard, he worked with me. We began to launch, we did a weekly radio show, national radio show, and we also did a weekly television show. We were doing television handicapping sports. But I did it in a different spin or different vein. In the television shows that were out there, there were all the boiler room sales shows, and they were old, they were hard to swallow, they were hard to like. We put a totally different spin on television back then, and it was doing it the right way, being honest about what it is we were doing, and telling people that, hey, there is a way you can win. And so that's basically what, the way we did all that. Well, getting back to Richard Clamian, my good friend, who has since passed, being an odds maker at the Stardust way back in the day, he invited me to a meeting, a Tuesday morning meeting that Bob Martin, I don't know how many people in this room remember Bob Martin, but Bob was, in his time, he was the head odds maker in Las Vegas. He put out the first number, I believe, Gil, from the Union Plaza, right? And so they would have a Tuesday morning meeting every Tuesday morning. This is how the lines were originated in Las Vegas back in the day. I'm talking back in the late 70s. And they would meet Tuesday mornings and have a breakfast. And at the breakfast, they would have Bob Martin, Richard Clamian, and all the other sportsbook directors from Las Vegas would sit there over breakfast, and they'd chew over what they thought the NFL line should be that particular day. Well, Richard, my good friend, was an avid underdog lover, just loved the dogs. And back then, being a contrarian handicapper was the way to go if you wanted to be profitable. Maybe perhaps today not so much. It was as Matt Holt discussed earlier, but back then it was. So Richard, at these meetings, his objective was to get Bob to open the line as high as he could possibly open it so that he can take the biggest number and then come back, the game would settle in back the other way. Well, Bob caught on to him real quick. So whatever Richard suggested the line should be, if the line should be 7, and Richard Clamian said 10, Bob knew 7 was the right number. So I had just the thrill of sitting in on one of those breakfasts, and was even asked what I thought the line should be, and I was like, I'm dumbfounded. You're asking me what a line should be? I want to handicap what you guys tell me you're going to put out there. And that gets to a point that I want to also express is that as a handicapper, the one thing that I've really learned or come to learn is that don't question the odds maker's line. Everybody wants to develop a power rating. They want to have a number that they think is a good number on a game and feel confident about, and that's all good. But the odds makers know what they're doing. And my job as a handicapper is to handicap the game at the line the odds maker has put out. Not that I feel that the line is short or the line is too big. Handicap the game as the line has been put out, because for all of the resources that I have today, and I'm talking about a database that we call our well-oiled machine that helps me gain my edges, the fact of the matter is I don't question the odds maker's number. I can suppose what I think he's going to open the line at, but I don't question what it is that he puts out there, because today, especially in this world of algorithms, which wasn't even in the dictionary back in those days, that word didn't even exist. But with everything like Ed Fang and Matt Holt were talking about, those numbers are really fine-tuned, and they're sharper today than they've ever been in history, in sports betting history. So I'm not going to make it a battle between myself and Matt Holt. No, I'm going to handicap the number that Matt puts out there and see how it fits into what I do. So today, as it was back then, there are really three primary forms of handicapping that exists. What I call fundamental, statistical, and technical. And to be a good handicapper, a successful handicapper, you have to be able to incorporate all three of those facets into your ability to handicap games. I'm an avid technical handicapper, and I'm avid because I have a database that has lines and scores since 1980 of every football and basketball game that's ever been played. So I have the luxury of being able to go in there and do queries. I can build what I call sets on teams, on individuals, and that's all good. Those are all edges for me, and that's because what we're talking about here in being a successful handicapper is edges. All it is basically an accumulation of edges, and the more edges you can put in your favor, the better chance you have of overcoming that ugly 11 to 10 odds. Let me tell you a little bit of a story also, going back in the day, before I want to get into what we're doing here today, is my style of handicapping today is what I call the Woody Hayes theory of handicapping. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, of where, for whatever reason, I don't know what it is in the water, in the Lake Erie water, but there's an abundance of handicappers that come out of Cleveland, Ohio. Phil Steele, I can go on and on and on, but maybe we had nothing better to do there in that town other than trying to handicap sports. But being from Cleveland, Ohio, we followed the Ohio State Buckeyes. We didn't have a hometown Cleveland football team, so we followed the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Cleveland Browns. Well, growing up, Woody Hayes was the head coach for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and obviously everybody knows about the rivalry between Ohio State and Michigan. Well, Woody Hayes had a passion, a disdain for Michigan. This is where the rivalry all began back in the day, Bo Schembechler, Woody Hayes. So Ohio State plays Michigan up in Ann Arbor, and the Buckeyes lose a bad football game. They were just drilled. They were beaten to a pulp. And Woody Hayes was just fuming after this loss, just fuming. So the team gets on the bus. They're getting ready to go back to Columbus, and the bus driver tells Woody Hayes, he says, Coach, he says, just get us back to Columbus. He says, Coach, we don't have enough gas to get there. We got to stop and get some gas. And Woody Hayes says, we're not buying any gas in the goddamn state of Michigan. Get this bus going. So the bus driver knows they're not going to make it to Columbus, Ohio, but Woody Hayes insists that they're not going to buy gas in the state of Michigan. So what do? They get 2 miles short of the border from Michigan to Ohio, right outside of Toledo, and the bus runs out of gas. So Woody Hayes just promptly orders every player on that bus to get out, and he made them push that bus for 2 miles from Michigan into the state of Ohio. That's Woody Hayes. That's who he was. He refused to lose. He didn't like losing, and he didn't like Michigan at all. So what was Woody Hayes all about as a head coach? Well, what Woody Hayes' success came from was the fact that he just ran the ball down your throat. We're talking back before the days of wishbone football that we see today. All he did was pound the ball right down your throat. You wouldn't stop. You knew it's coming. And reporters would ask him, they would say, Woody, why don't you ever throw the ball? Why, you always run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. He says, what's the deal? And he says, well, basically, if you throw the football, 3 things can happen, and 2 of them are bad. The only thing that's good is if you can complete a pass. Conversely, if you run the football, 3 things can happen, 2 of them are good. Well, that's my style of handicapping because I love underdogs. And when you bet underdogs, 3 things can happen and 2 of them are good. They win the game, they lose the game and beat the spread, or they lose the game and don't beat the spread. But if you're laying favorites consistently, you're overcoming a much, much higher hurdle there because you have to win and cover the play in order to cash your ticket. So many times, bad beats occur. We're all familiar now with Scott Van Pelt. He's a good friend of mine, does all the bad beat segments on ESPN, and we all live those bad beats. We know exactly what they're all about. But there's a less likelihood of bad beats that are going to be involved when you're on underdogs as opposed to when you're betting favorites. And so that ultimately ends up becoming what I call my Woody Hayes style of handicapping. I look for underdogs, I look for live dogs, I look for live underdogs that I feel going into the game have a good chance to win that football game. And if they don't win that football game, they have at least a good chance of covering the point spread number. If I can bring an underdog into a football game that has the better defense, better defensive dogs, I feel really comfortable about my position. And that's what has ultimately ended up winning out for me in the long run is isolating live underdogs with good defenses, conversely looking to fade bad favorites with lousy defenses because bad favorites find ways to lose games, live dogs find ways to win football games. So, it's sort of a pattern that I put together here, but it's one that I live for. The first thing I do when these lines come out Sunday night is, one, I go into my database and I'm running my systems and my angles out of my database, but I'm looking for, I'll ask myself, okay, who are the top 5 underdogs on the football card each week that bring the best defense into this football game? Second question, do they have a winning record? Again, winning teams find ways to win, losing teams find ways to lose. So by the time everything settles out in the wash, we're focusing on those live underdogs that have a chance to win those particular football games. I also want to share with you, before I'm going to get into what we can look at here today for the upcoming football season, I'm going to talk with you about that in just a bit here. So that's the way handicapping was back when I got into this business, when the Vietnam War was going on back in 1975. It was also the year, by the way, Tiger Woods was born. But today, what are we going up against today with the odds maker, with what Matt Holt, Ed Fang, we talk about having everything to beat the computer, if you will. Well, the computer back in the day when I started the business, then here along comes Billy Walters. And Billy made a huge, huge impact in the world of sports wagering as we know today. In his day, there wasn't an internet, so he didn't have the ability to be able to use the internet to gain access to a lot of vital information that we're so privy to today. The internet was, it's terrific, there's no question about that, but it's also a detriment. And a detriment in the sense that whatever it was that Billy Walters found that worked in his favor, it was his own exclusive information, if you will. If there were injuries to a football game, Billy Walters knew about them, the rest of the world didn't know about them. And one of the ways Billy Walters found out about injury information is another friend of mine, his name was Bob Hurst, we call him the Golden Goose. Well, Billy employed Bob, the Golden Goose, as his injury information guru. And what Bob did was he had every newspaper from every major city delivered to his doorstep every day. And he would pour through those newspapers and look for injuries, report them to Billy, and right away the word got out Billy Walters is on a game, and almost invariably, because everything we're talking about here, winning and losing, all comes down to one critical factor, and that's value. You have to have value on your side, or you're just not going to overcome the 11-10. So Billy had value because, one, he was privy to the information that nobody else was privy to. A guy in Denver might well have known that John Elway tweaked his ankle in practice. But back in the day before the internet, none of us knew until maybe it was reported 2 or 3 days later on television, but Billy knew about this. So Billy had that advantage right away before the internet was out there for information, because everything is all about information. Well, once the internet became available, it took that luxury away from him, in a sense, because the golden goose's egg was dead, because he was everybody had injury information. So Billy really relied heavily on his computer guys to do a lot of the things that we talk about today, crunching numbers, putting numbers in the computer. So he evolved as well, Billy Walters did, as times changed, as we're doing here today. As times change, we all have to evolve. We have to do things that are going to increase our chances to win and make us a little bit more successful today than they were then. Unfortunately for Billy, I think everybody in here probably knows who I'm talking about, the gambler that he was, and he was just unfortunately indicted, and they found him guilty, and he's going to do a little time, 5 years, for what it was that he was so good at doing. But he's a great guy, country boy from Kentucky, and I had the pleasure of meeting up with him, and just a real regular guy who just hated anybody having an edge over him. And that's what he does. He made sure that nobody had those edges, if you will. So now we're into the new era of football handicapping. And my business, I've had very fortunate success at doing well with what it is that I do. And one of the reasons is I believe in total transparency in what it is that I do. I make sure that from the first day that I ever heard of the word of a monitor was to make sure that everything that I do is monitored and documented, good or bad. I wanted to make sure that everything I did was monitored. It was total transparency. So it works well when you're winning. When you're losing, not so well. Last year I had a down year, so it's a little bit tough that way because, excuse me, it's out there for everybody to see. But I had 8 straight good years in a row before that, so the good outweighs the bad. But the bottom line here is because I want everybody to become aware of what it is that I do, and if I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, it's going to be true, it's going to be honest, it's going to be factual, because I live my life by the golden rule. That's how we live our life today. That's our business model. So before I get to these slides here, I want to share with you, I have a good friend. He's become a really good client, I should say. And his name is Steve Crabb. We call him the Texas Tornado. And he's out of Texas, obviously. And he's watching this on live stream. He watched yesterday's. He's just thrilled with everything that's going on here. He wishes he could have been here. We invited him. He couldn't make it. His brother had a heart attack. He's got to watch him, and he couldn't do it. But he said, make sure when you're there that you let everybody know that the only way that you're going to be successful are the 3 main important facets of sports betting discipline. And it's so critical if you're not disciplined to win in this football game or to win in this arena. Number 1, you have to have a predetermined plan of what it is you're going to do. Bet the sports that you have a proven winning record on making money with. If you don't know anything about soccer, why are you betting soccer? It reminds me of the story of a guy who had lost 15 bets in a row betting hockey games, and he calls his bookmaker, and the bookmaker says, "There's no hockey games tonight. What do you want?" He says, "I got basketball, baseball, soccer." The guy says, "Soccer?" He says, "I don't know anything about soccer. but they lost 15 basketball games in a row. So make sure you know what it is that you're really, really good at and focus in on that. Allow yourself a chance to win. Number 2, make sure you have a predetermined bankroll. Teddy Covers talked about this earlier, and it's so critically important to make sure that you're playing with money that you can afford to lose. It's not what you want to win, it's the money that you can afford to lose and not change your lifestyle. I've seen so many people in this business that are really, really sharp handicappers. They know what they're doing. In fact, I'm sure the counters in Vegas, there's people that go up to those counters in Vegas and they may bet, they may be $100 better, a half dollar better. But if they win and they keep churning profits out, they're going to get the attention of Matt Holt and the sportsbook directors there, because these people, it doesn't matter how much they're betting, it's whether or not they're successful at what it is they're doing in their betting. So you need to become a bet application expert when you're doing that. Make sure you manage your money if you want to end up making sure you have profits at the end of a football season. And number 3 is you do a daily game plan. You do the checks and the counter checks to make sure you're staying focused, you're remaining disciplined, you're treating this like a business and not like fun, because while it's fun watching a game and it's fun cashing a ticket, the bottom line is a business. And if you want to continue to keep doing it as a fan, or if you want to enter into this business and become a handicapper, you have to make sure that you're approaching it with a business mentality. There's a good friend of mine in Las Vegas also. His name is Bernie Fratto. He was a voice for the Detroit Lions when he lived in Detroit. He lives in Las Vegas now, and I was on the panel with him at the Westgate Superbook contest last year. We were talking about the NFL, and Bernie's a real positive mental attitude kind of a guy. And he always remembers to pound this down my throat. He says, remember, opportunity for greatness comes at the very moment that ordinary people give up. So don't let losing streaks stop you from what your endeavors are. If things are going bad, like Teddy said before, analyze what you did, what you didn't do right, what was my handicap, what did I miss in this handicap? Stay focused on what you're doing, and when the times are at their worst, it's the time you roll your sleeves up and you do your hardest work. Because if you do that, it's going to lay the foundation for your future success in what it is exactly that you're going to ultimately end up doing. I call myself a technical handicapper, and one of the things I want to profess here is that people think I published the Playbook magazine. It's got a ton of trends in there, and they're all good, and they look good, and I want to go out and I want to bet these things. But you got to remember, trends look good, but you don't bet a game just because of a trend, okay? You don't bet a game because of a trend. There are what I call systems or angles and the difference in a trend and a system and an angle is that a system or an angle applies to all teams. A trend applies to just one team. A trend can be like a gumball coming out of a machine. You could get 11 yellow gumballs in a row out of a machine. Is that a system? Is that an angle? Is it a pattern? No, it's coincidence. And trends are oftentimes, more often than not, coincidence. If they're not applied logically, but if you look at things from the level of a league as a whole, and it becomes a system or an angle, you can learn to rely on those. And I rely heavily on those with my database. That's my style of handicapping. That's my Woody Hayes approach, if you will, to sports betting handicapping. One of the things that I do is to create a niche, if you will. And when I'm saying a niche, it doesn't matter what your style of handicapping is, what it is that you do. Just make sure that what it is you do, you believe in what it is that you do. Because if you believe in what it is that you do, you can maximize the most success possible from doing that. So create your own niche. The little bit of a niche that I've created here of late has been to utilize my database. And with that, instead of handicapping teams and as they are, I'll look at handicapping coaches, or I'll look at handicapping quarterbacks. There's also, you can break down schedules and so forth and whatnot, but within my database, I've created a database of coaches, and I've created a database of quarterbacks. And you ask, well, why would you do that? You can just handicap the team. Well, the fact of the matter is that quarterbacks take on the personalities of the coaches. Whether it's their system that they're running, it's what they're being drilled and taught to do each week. So it's an invaluable tool, if you will, in handicapping coaches and handicapping quarterbacks. With that, I'm going to ask the girls back there if you're ready. Okay, I'm going to show you guys, I want to share with you guys some of the things this year that you can look at for this 2017 football season coming up. College football coaches. And these are coaches that we're going to put them in, which college football coaches are at their very best in the world of handicapping college football. Well, the next slide. Here we go. I hope you can read that. From the top, the best coach in college football in home games, hands down, bar none, is Bill Snyder from Kansas State. The guy is a money-making machine at home. If you want to bet against Kansas State when they're at home, you better have a boatload of reasons to fade Bill Snyder at home. The guy likes to put a show on in front of the hometown crowd. Look at his record, 88-46 in his career at home. I'd love to be 88-46 for my life, okay? But that's what he is. The best college football coach on the road, Northern Illinois, Rod Carey. Relatively young coach, but he's carrying on a winning tradition at Northern Illinois where they know how to win football games on the road. Rod Carey's won 19 out of 25 games in his career on the road at Northern Illinois. They're a road juggernaut, Northern Illinois. Again, if you want to fade this football team, you better make sure you have bullets in your holster. This is probably the biggest surprise of all. The best college football coach today, and I'm talking, these are coaches with their teams that they currently coach today. The best college football coach today, as a favorite, is David Bailiff from Rice, if you can believe that. My God, Rice, a rotten football team. But when they're installed as favorites, they're playing somebody that is really, really a bad football team, okay? And that's the few football games that David Bailiff is capable of winning football games. He's probably not going to be there maybe more than this year. But if he's at home and he's favored, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, my God, you know, I got to grab the points against Rice. Don't do it. Not at Rice, not against David Bailiff, because that's the one place that he saves his job, if you will. Best underdog coach right now is Chuck Martin, Miami of Ohio. Miami of Ohio had a great season last year, and they mowed down the numbers. The guys on the SBR Forum panel talked a little bit about them earlier and mentioned the fact that Miami lost their first 6 games to begin the season. Then they won their last 6 football games to end the season. That's the only team in college football to ever do that. Miami of Ohio did last year. That was Chuck Martin. Great underdog. 18-9 to the spread. That's 66% of the time that he wins the money as an underdog. Again, these are situations where you might not like these coaches, you might not like these roles, but you might not want to go against them in these particular roles. Or if you do, again, you better have a lot of good reasons. The best coach in conference play, Blake Anderson, Arkansas State. And this is a tradition that's been going on at Arkansas State here for quite a while because they've been a football coaching factory, if you will. There's been a lot of good coaches that have been at Arkansas State. One and done, go to bigger schools. Blake Anderson's currently there right now. He's 17-7 to the spread in conference games. Non-conference games, it was Hugh Freeze. And he was terrific in non-conference games. I'm not saying was because we all know Hugh Freeze just resigned. It was forced to resign. I guess the new head coach there might probably want to know the number of his escort service that he used right now. But it's not going to do. We'll see whether or not it was a Hugh Freeze thing or whether it was a Mississippi thing. But nonetheless, our next slide, if you could do that, please. Okay. The worst money burners in college football. These are the guys that just chew up the money in college football. Terry Bowden, head coach at Akron, former head coach at Auburn, highly successful, but at Akron, he just doesn't get the job done. I mean, it's hard to recruit at that level where he's at right now, and he's not doing a very good. He's 7-17 to the spread. Best coach on the worst coach on the road, Sean Kugler from UTEP, probably won't be there a whole lot longer either. He's 9-15 to the spread. Worst favorite in college football, Joey Jones, South Alabama. Football came on board recently. They're not job done. The worst dog in college football, and you can mark this down, this will be his last year at Arizona, Rich Rodriguez. 10-19 to the spread. And the reason I'm saying his last year at Arizona is, if you look at what's happening at Arizona right now, this team has fallen dramatically off the map. And the reason they've fallen dramatically off the map is, and he admits it, he's done a terrible job recruiting. His recruitments are the worst of all Power 5 college football programs. You don't recruit players, you can't win football games. He had a hard time winning football games when he had talent, when he was at West Virginia. Rich Rodriguez, the worst dog in college football. The worst conference coach in college football, Kevin Sumlin, Texas A&M, a little bit surprising. I know Johnny was here talking earlier. He had a big part of the success that Johnny had with Kevin Sumlin, Texas A&M, and the numbers that they covered the spread when Johnny Manziel was there. You take him out of the equation, Kevin Sumlin is not a good spread-beating football coach, and largely because he lays some big numbers here. Non-conference, surprisingly, Rocky Long, who has been a money-making machine at San Diego State, okay, I think Gabe knows this as well, he does not do well outside the conference. He focuses on winning that conference, going to a bowl game, that's his whole MO, and when he's outside the conference, you might want to look to put him on your fade list. Next screen, if you would. Okay, we're going to move over to the National Football League side of things here, and we're going to talk about NFL coaches right now. And these are the best coaches, if you will, in situational roles. Next screen, please. And this is very important for the NFL football. The best coach in the National Football League today, if I polled everybody in here, no one would probably say Mike Zimmer from Minnesota, but all he does is win money. He just is purely 100% focused on winning. That's Mike Zimmer from Minnesota. You do not want to step in front of him, especially in non-division football games. I think his number is like 27-4 or something like that. Away coach, Jack Del Rio, Oakland Raiders. He proved it last year. He knows how to win football games away from home, 14-5. The best favorite in the NFL, Bill O'Brien from the Houston Texans. Very, very good at handling laying numbers. He's 15-6 to the spread. The best underdog coach, Dan Quinn, Atlanta. A lot of that last year, in that big year that they had, he's only been there a couple of years, but he's proving to be a really good money-making coach, if you will. Next screen, if you would, please. These are the money burners, if you will. Jack Del Rio, as good as he is on the road, he's just as bad at home. He's 5-10 to the spread. On the road, Mike Mularkey, I know the guys on the forum were talking about him being a detriment to Tennessee, and a lot of guys like Tennessee this year. Mularkey might get in their way, but he's not good to the spread. He's only 4-9 to the spread. Talking favorite, the worst favorite, Jay Gruden from the Washington Redskins, just 6-11. The worst dog, no surprise, Hugh Jackson and Cleveland Browns, just because they're a rotten football team. They're no good, and it's Hugh Jackson happens to assume that mantle because he's there. He's just 4-12 to the spread. Next screen, if you would, please. These are coaches that, and this is another niche, if you will, in handicapping. This is looking at how coaches perform in the opening month of the season. Do they have their football teams prepared? And you can take this even into the preseason. You can see, how do they prepare in the preseason? Mike Zimmer just wins. It doesn't matter if it's regular season, preseason. Mike Zimmer just goes out for the jugular every football game he plays. Opening month of the season here, Bruce Arians, Arizona, 9-4 the spread. Small sample size, but it's Bruce Arians, it's his personality. He has his football team ready to begin a football season here. Gabe likes him real well this year. I do too. I think this is a football team that's a real keeper this year.
Playing each other in week 2.
Yes,
Bruce Arians, Chuck again.
there you go. So you got Harbaugh second there. He's a real good coach too. A month of there. Chuck Pagano, terrible first month, and as Gabe says, playing Arizona, Indianapolis, week number 2. That's a nice coach collision matchup the first month of the football season here. Mike Tomlin, Pittsburgh Steelers, surprisingly, he's only beat the spread 14 out of 34 times in the month of September. People want to load up on Pittsburgh. It's a mistake to do that early on. Next screen, if you would, please. This is December, the final month of the football season. How do these coaches close out? This is when it counts, when all the marbles are on the line, if you will. Again, look who's at the top of the list, Bruce Arians. And if Mike Zimmer wasn't in the league, I'd be telling you about Bruce Arians being the best head coach in the National Football League from a betting perspective. He brings solid defense to every football game that he plays. He very seldom gets out-coached. In the month of December, he's an animal. He's 14-6-2 to the spread. Pete Carroll, no surprise, Seattle Seahawks always seem to be in the playoffs since Pete Carroll's taken over there, and there's a reason, okay, because Pete Carroll knows how to put it in overdrive the last month of the football season, 21-8 to the spread. Mike McCarthy, Green Bay Packers, 31-16 to the spread. Where Mike McCarthy really excels, guys, is in division games. He just chews up the opponents in division games. He knows the importance of division games, and so too does Aaron Rodgers, his quarterback. I'm going to get to quarterbacks in just a little bit here. The worst coach in the month of December, and remember this year, because everybody's all over this team like white on rice because of what they did last year. This is Jason Garrett, okay, who I don't think can coach his way out of a paper bag, okay? But he was successful last year because of the two rookies, okay, basically because of Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. That offensive line they have is a wall. So everything fell into place for the Dallas Cowboys last year, okay? He's also, because he's this bad in the month of December, he's also a rotten favorite. He's the worst favorite in the National Football League as a head coach. So good things to keep in mind looking for extra edges. If you would, next screen, please. These are the quarterbacks in the National Football League. And a lot of people maybe dismiss handicapping quarterbacks, and it's a big mistake if you do, because these quarterbacks, they, just like coaches, have their own tendencies and their own personalities. Next screen, please. The best money-making quarterback in the NFL, Aaron Rodgers, hands down. The guy just wins football games, 89-59 to the spread. And if I have a note here, he's even better in division games. He just kills in division games. Tom Brady, no surprise. We put him on the cover of our magazine this year because he's won 5 Super Bowl games, that terrific Super Bowl win he had last year. In fact, I'm going to give you, what I'm going to tell you is the stat of the decade, if you will, about Tom Brady. And in his career in the National Football League, when he's at home playing an AFC team, he's 50-1. 50-1. The only loss that he had, that one loss, came against the Buffalo Bills in the last week of the season. New England had clinched the playoffs. Brady played the first half and went to the bench the second half. He got credited with the loss. He does not lose at home against teams in his conference, guys. 50-1 is a pretty strong number. Russell Wilson, a great money-making quarterback as well, especially as an underdog. We all know the stories about Russell Wilson and how well he plays against other Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. He steps up to the plate like no other quarterback in the NFL, Russell Wilson does. And he also obviously works with Pete Carroll, who's a great money-making machine himself as well. Andrew Luck, he's fallen on some hard times here of late because of injuries. Looks like he might be injured again here this football season here. But he's very, very tough to fade. 43-30, good numbers, but those numbers were a lot better 2 seasons ago. He's really kind of coming down, if you will, because of the injury situation. Next screen, real quick, if you would. These are the worst quarterbacks in the National Football League. Surprisingly, Marcus Mariota, who I think is going to be a good quarterback in this league, he's just not getting the number done. I don't know if it's a Mike Mularkey thing, but Mariota's just not covering spreads right now. He's 11-17 to the spread in his career. Matthew Stafford, what a money-burning machine he is. Great quarterback, all the physical tools, #1 pick of the draft, been a starter forever with the Lions. 45-63 to the spread. Horrific as a favorite. If he comes favored to the Detroit Lions, you have to have him on your fade list. Again, you don't automatically knee-jerk and do this stuff, but finding him favored, you're either going to look to play against him or don't look to lay any points with him. I put Robert Griffin, RG3, on here. I don't know why. Supposedly he's trying out again with a team in the NFL. He's not won anywhere. He's on this bad quarterback list, 18-23. And the other guy's Josh McCown for the New York Jets, who doesn't surprise anybody either. And won't this year. They're going to be absolutely the worst team in the National Football League this year, the New York Jets. The Cleveland Browns are going to lose out of the #1 draft choice because of the New York Jets this year. Okay. Next screen, real quick, if you would. These are the best and the worst quarterbacks in division games. I talked to you about Aaron Rodgers, how good he is. 36-17 to the spread in division games. You don't want to go up against Aaron Rodgers in a division game. You're either going to bet him or, again, just watch the football game. Ben Roethlisberger, we know he's a money-making machine. He's really good as an underdog. He's terrific in division games, 43-27. There's Matthew Stafford again coming up, lousy 15-25. And Ryan Tannehill, unfortunately, down again. Looks like with the injury here. Teddy Covers and I were talking about this yesterday. And the word out of Miami is it may be Jay Cutler. Oh, my God. In Miami, if he goes there. And the only reason Jay Cutler's name doesn't appear on any of these worst lists is because he's not on a roster at this time. But he is hands down the worst favorite in the National Football League, Jay Cutler. So remember that if he does make it to Miami, you want no piece of Jay Cutler or the Dolphins. And by the way, just personally, I think the Dolphins are going to be in for a real hard year this football season here this year. They won 10 games last year. They got out-yarded by 60 yards in a football game. They won, I think, 8 games by a touchdown or less. That stuff bites you, man, the next year. It's that regression to the mean, and the Miami Dolphins are, I think, going to have a real hard time this football season. Next screen, if you will. Let's get into the final month of the season. Russell Wilson, best quarterback in the National Football League in December. Andy Dalton, really good. Surprising, you think Cincinnati's no good late stages of the season. They are in December. They just can't win a playoff game when they get there. Aaron Rodgers, terrific. Matthew Stafford, again, on the bad list. Next screen, please. Okay, let's go over the National Football League side of things now. And this is what I'm calling true strength of schedule. And, you know, it's looking at game. People love handicapping schedules before the season begins. And the most common thing is to look at the opponent's record that they played last year. And that's really the worst way to evaluate a strength of schedule. I found the best way is what I do is I take the opening numbers that Jay Cornegay puts out of the Westgate for season win totals every year. I use that as my starting base, and I add up the collective records of all their opponents to see where they stand with wins and losses, or how many wins are expected to be. If you go to the next screen, please. This year, the team that will take on the roughest schedule in the National Football League, based on opponents' season win projections this year, is the New Orleans Saints. By far, 4.5 wins more than anybody else. It'll be a real rough schedule here for New Orleans based on what Jay Cornegay says that their season win totals will be. Second worst, the Buffalo Bills, who I happen to like this year. Miami's there again, another reason maybe to put them on your fade list. Atlanta Falcons, Super Bowl loser. We all know about the Super Bowl loser syndrome and how tough that is. And I think the Falcons are going to have a real hard time this year, not just because of the syndrome, but because of a lot of other reasons. Detroit Lions, 5th worst, most difficult schedule. Next screen, please. Easiest schedules, okay? Indianapolis Colts, opponents' softest schedule in the National Football League this year. If they can keep Andrew Luck standing up, they may have a chance to take advantage of that. Second worst, the Seattle Seahawks, which would be beneficial to them. I know Gabe doesn't like them this year. I do. We'll battle about that on the show this year. Third worst, or Cincinnati tied with them with a soft schedule here. I like the Bengals this football season here. They had a rare losing season last year. They've done a lot of good things in the offseason here. I think they're going to be a real sleeper playoff type team this year. Arizona, I like them real well. Fewest wins, Oakland and New England, also soft schedules this year. Next schedule, please. Okay, this is something a little bit different that we do at Playbook, and it's looking at teams and looking at how their opponents did against the spread last year, and looking at them collectively to see, you know, what pattern they have. And I'll tell you what all this really means here is Carolina last year, opponents were 137 and 110 collectively to the spread. Okay, their opponents did real well to the spread. This stuff almost always reverses and goes back to the mean. So you can look for Carolina last year went up against that tough spread schedule thing to come back the other way this year. I like the Carolina Panthers real well this year, and one interesting thing about the Carolina Panthers this year, this sort of blew my mind when I come across this, is since the Super Bowl loser who loses a Super Bowl game and fails to make it to the playoffs the following year. So you go Super Bowl lose, you have your expected down season, you don't even show up, you don't make the playoffs the next year. It's happened 14 times. All 14 times that those teams have made it back to the playoffs the following year. 14 out of 14. That's the Carolina Panthers this year, guys. So keep an eye on that. New York Jets, Buffalo on this tough ATS schedule thing. Bottom side, Jacksonville are playing teams that were really soft against the spread last year. Could be a little more difficult this year. Indianapolis, Tennessee. Next one, if you will. I don't want to go too long on time here. These are what I call the gaffes in the National Football League schedule this year. This is pretty interesting stuff here, if you will. A good friend of mine is Ed Meyer from MTI Sports. Ed's a professor at Bowden Wallace College in Cleveland, Ohio, and he puts out some terrific NFL stuff. And he's got a computer. Everybody may know that it's an SDL computer. A lot of people use it to handicap with. And if you would go to the next slide. This is breaking down the schedules as they are this year. You take a look at the opponents that are coming off a bye week. The New York Giants are going to face 4 opponents that are coming off a bye week this year, okay? That's not good for the New York Giants, okay? Second, right behind them is Detroit and San Francisco, 3 times each. On the flip side, foes that have a bye week the following week, Cleveland, Miami, New Orleans, 3 times each. And by the way, I'm going to wrap up with this here real quick. I've got this difficulty of schedule thing here. I've got sheets here. Everybody wants. I got some pass outs here. If you want to see exactly what these are, there's really good information here. You're welcome to them. Next screen, please. Opponents coming off a Monday night game this year. Dallas and San Francisco are going to play 4 opponents each that are coming off Monday night football games this year. You have to factor that into your equation, into your thinking, especially late in the season. The 3rd and the 4th times it's going to wear on these football teams. Opponents coming off a Thursday game, Dallas and Washington 3 times each. Keep that in mind. Next schedule, or next screen, sorry. Opponents in division sandwiches, real simple. Had a division game, playing a non-division, have a division game up next. Indianapolis, Dallas, Miami, Oakland, the most this year, 3 times. These are opponents in the second away games. The Miami Dolphins benefit from this because they're going to face 5 opponents this year. They're going to be in the second of back-to-back road games. So that's the one favorable thing for Miami in that sense. On the bottom, Chicago, Jacksonville, Seattle, nobody. Interesting stat. And the next screen, if you will. This might be the last one. That is the last one? Okay. Okay, guys, before I go, I want to wrap it up with, tell you one of my favorite quick stories. And it ties a little bit into the handicapping world. And one of my favorite stories is about a couple, and I can relate to this. My wife and I are doing our 50th wedding anniversary here. Married 50 years, dirt poor, West Virginia. I'll use West Virginia here. And the husband dies, okay, and they got to go to the funeral home. And the wife takes the husband to the funeral home, and the funeral director says to the wife, he says, is there anything we can do, ma'am, to help you out with the funeral here? And they don't have 2 nickels to rub together. And she says, well, you know, if there's any one thing you could do for us, John always wanted to be buried in a blue suit, and we don't have a blue suit. All I've got is this gray suit. If there's any way at all you can help us out here, I would really deeply appreciate that. So they get John ready, and the next day they lay him out, and she goes to look at the funeral home, and there he is. He's laid out in this casket in a beautiful blue suit. And the funeral director goes up to her and he says, is everything okay, ma'am? And she's got tears in her eyes, and she says, I can't thank you enough for what you did for me. He says, ma'am, he says, it was no problem whatsoever. He says, right after you left, another couple came in. He was about the same size as your husband. He came in a blue suit. He says, I just switched heads. The moral to the story, what I'm trying to tell you is as I close my radio podcast out every week, I close it out with this phrase: remember to always to bet with your head, not over it, and good luck as always if you want to keep your head about you this football season. Thank you very much.